Good evening. Hello. How's everyone doing? Great. Great turnout. I appreciate you being here. I do recognize with the time change we had a couple of weeks ago that it gets dark awfully early, but I appreciate you coming out to an evening meeting here. We have some great information that we want to present to you. You've probably been here earlier to see some of the boards. Hopefully you were able to get some information on there, but just logistically wise, when the meeting's over, we'll be around afterwards. So if you're at the boards now, if you want to go ahead and grab a seat, we can go ahead and get started. I'm Kirby Hawkins. I'm Assistant Vice President here at the T. I'm also the project manager for this Transit Master Plan study effort that we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight's an important night because after about 11 months of study and analysis, tonight's the night that we actually present some of our recommendations. So before we begin, I did want to recognize one of our board members, Tito Rodriguez. He's one of our newest board members, so I'm going to let them know that you're kind of new to the board, so send your questions to me. I'll filter them. I've only met him one time before today, and he's doing a great job so far, I can tell you that much. So a lot of other staff members from the T that are here today to assist. So we also, one of our other board members just stepped in, Andre McEwen as well. Hello. Andre is our vice chair of our board as well, so thank you for being here. T staff members have tags on their chest, and I left mine somewhere. So after the meeting, you'll be able to identify those. But we have hired a firm called Nelson Nygaard to assist with our study effort. They're a nationally known planning firm, and they operate off of both coasts of the United States, East and West Coast. And they've come in, and over the last few months, they've took a look at our system, and they've identified and analyzed our system from a national perspective. And the results that you hear today are not only based on the input that we've received, but their analysis. So that's why it's important for us to present this plan and to let you know that even though these are sort of our final draft recommendations, these are our final draft recommendations. We can still make adjustments based on the input that you and others provide to us after tonight and after tonight. Our final plan, we plan to present to our board of directors in January, but even then, even when we present our final plan in January, it's always a work in progress to improve transit, so we still want to hear from you. So I'm not going to talk too much longer. We have a formal presentation, then we'll do a Q&A process at the end, and then we'll be open to let you walk around and continue to give input. So with that, Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. She's with Nelson Nygaard.
Thanks, Kirby. Sorry that I gave you a hard time about not being in here. But as Kirby said, I'm Jennifer Wieland, and I am with Nelson Nygaard. I'm based out of our Seattle office, and I am joined today by my colleague Erin Rosenblum, who's in the back. Erin is based out of our Boston office, so we do have both coasts with you here tonight as well. So as Kirby mentioned, what we're going to present tonight are the preliminary final, how about we call them that, 5-year recommendations. So I'm going to start off by giving you a quick history of what we've done on the project to date, and then we'll spend most of our time talking about the recommendations. Okay, so over the last 11 months, we did start this project in the early part of 2015. We have spent a lot of time talking to people and hearing from people. We started the project doing what we call a state of the system report, which included a look at markets for transit, where's their demand for transit. We looked at some peer cities and peer transit systems, and then did an evaluation of the existing services and system. That really led us to some key issues and opportunities for the T. And then we started talking about potential improvement strategies. What are the kinds of things that we could do to make transit service better in Fort Worth and Tarrant County? A lot of those potential improvement strategies are represented in our recommendations that are on the boards around the room tonight, and that we'll talk through in just a minute. So I mentioned that there's been extensive engagement as part of this project. So where all have we been? Well, this is our 3rd round of public meetings. We started the project with a slew of public meetings in April and then came back to folks in September to talk more in a setting like this. In between those public meetings, the T staff has been out at various community groups, other organizational meetings, making presentations to people. We've also engaged with people online. We've held a couple of Twitter town halls. We have a website that's got a discussion board on it as well. And then of course we've had emails and even letters come in to the T throughout this project. Another thing that we've done that's been really successful on this project to get people engaged without asking them to come out to a meeting is we've used our project bus. That top right photo, you can see the bus. It's an older T bus that's been wrapped in special transit master plan branding. And we've taken it out to over 30 locations and invited people onto the bus to share information about the project and get their feedback. So that's been a really great way to hear from people. Through all of that engagement, there are a number of themes that have come up over and over. One of the most common things that we've heard from people is that they really want to see more service for more hours. If any of you ride the T or are familiar with the hours of service that the T operates, it's pretty short. Most services end by 8 p.m. and all routes are done running by 11 p.m. There's also not very frequent service today. Typically, there are very few routes that operate more often than every 20 minutes. Every 30 minutes or even every hour is much more common. So that's something that was really, really important to people, has been important to people throughout this project. We are also hearing from people that they want us to take a regional approach to transit. When somebody's trying to make a trip on transit, it does not matter to them where the county line is, it doesn't matter to them where the city line is. They want to be able to get to their destination or at least make a connection to another service that will take them to their destination. So really thinking regionally has been an important piece of this. We've heard a lot about interest in rail, commuter rail and streetcar and other types of premium services, and then doing things that support transit, improving facilities, making connections easier for people, and then simply making the service easier for people to understand. So I mentioned the market analysis. That was one of our first pieces of work, and I'm just going to give you a couple quick highlights here as background. So what you're seeing on this map is, on the left you're seeing 2010, and on the right you're seeing 2035, and this is what we call our transit index. Essentially what these maps do is combine population and employment density, and then a number of demographic factors that really impact transit demand. And so if you look at the map for 2010, you're seeing some dark orange and dark red areas. Those are areas where we expect there to be good amounts of transit demand. If we fast forward 25 years, so looking at, 20 years from now, you can see that those areas of significant demand continue to grow. So all of these dark orange and red areas are places where we would expect there to be strong demand for transit in the future. That's really important when we look at where the T's coverage goes right now, and I've got a map that shows that in a few minutes. In terms of our peer cities, we looked at peers to Fort Worth, future peers to Fort Worth, so cities that are the size Fort Worth is growing to be. And then we also focused in on Texas, recognizing that the climate for transit and funding in Texas is a little bit different than some other places. So this slide gives you a quick look at the 5 biggest transit systems in Texas. And what we're seeing here, and this is not going to be a surprise to any of you, is that the T receives the least local funding of any of those systems. There's a couple factors that impact that. First, possibly most importantly, there are only 3 communities that are full members of the T. What that means is that those communities contribute a half-cent sales tax, and that's part of what's required at this point to become a member of the T. That half-cent sales tax is a big challenge for a lot of communities. Sales tax, the amount that a city is able to collect, is constitutionally capped in the state of Texas, and many cities are already up against that cap. So having that extra half-cent available is really a challenge for folks. What all of that means, though, is that the T is collecting only about $61 million a year in sales tax. If you compare that just to Austin, who's the next peer up in terms of service area size, they are collecting 3 times as much, and they're only serving 175,000 more people. So that's a huge difference, and that really impacts the T's services. The good news on the Pierce side of things is that the T is using the funding that it has very effectively. This is not a case of the T having money and squandering it. The T is being very, very efficient about how it operates its bus services. It's spending about $92 for an hour of bus service, which is really, really good, not just in Texas, but nationally. So then kind of tying these two pieces of demand and service availability together, there's a couple slides that I want to show you. I'm going to toggle back and forth between these. What you are looking at here is 1976. So the little yellow dots that you see on the screen, each one of those represents 100 people. The red system that you see on the right is the T. That wasn't its name back then, but we'll just call it the T for simplicity. And then on the right, you're seeing the DART system from 1976. And what you can see is that even though the system's relatively small in both cases, there's a pretty good match between service and where people were living. You can see that the T system has grown, but it hasn't grown as much as population has. It hasn't grown to meet that need, and it hasn't grown anywhere near to the degree that Dallas's system has grown. Look at what's happened there. Now, of course, funding is a huge piece of the story, but it is really illustrative, I think, to see what has changed in those 40 years. So coming out of all of that initial analysis, we identified this set of key opportunities. And these really match what we've heard from people throughout the project. So the technical work is lining up with what people are saying, what people are experiencing. And just to hit on these points again really quickly, we've, I think, illustrated that services just haven't kept up with growth, and also the growth that is projected to occur. So this map does an overlay of the 2035 transit index. So where do we expect demand in 2035 with the T's current system? And so you see the mismatch. You see a lot of those areas with really dark red and orange where there's no service, and that starts to inform the 5-year recommendations we're going to talk about in just a second. We've talked through the funding piece and the fact that service is infrequent and short. The other thing that we have that I do want to mention before we jump into the recommendations is something that we both heard from people and observed, which is that the T's image is poor. People really see the T as an option of last resort and don't think about transit in Tarrant County being a way that is easy to, being a system that's easy to use, being a way to get around for people. So that's an opportunity for us to address through these recommendations. So to build these recommendations, the first thing that we did was establish a vision and goals, a vision and a set of goals for transit in Tarrant County and for the Transit Master Plan. And I think you'll see these as we move through the next few slides, but really the focus on enhancing, connecting, simplifying, and creating a sustainable system that provides compelling and competitive transit service to make Tarrant County more livable and support continued economic growth. So the 5-year recommendations are the start of reaching that vision. They're the start of making transit more compelling and convenient and really making it something that is useful for a broader cross-section of Tarrant County's residents. Not just residents, but workers and visitors as well. Part of a great transit system helps to provide choices for people, which in turn can make an area more competitive and really support the growth that's happening. And the vision is not just words on a piece of paper, it is also lines on a map. And hopefully you had a chance to take a look at this map in the back. We certainly welcome your feedback on this. What we're trying to do with this transit vision is identify the types of services that are scaled appropriately for Fort Worth, but that are comparable to what we see in other major cities, what we see in other areas that are like Fort Worth. It does have to, of course, match the context here, but moving forward to provide service throughout most of the county is a really, really important opportunity. We've talked a bit about membership and the member communities, and certainly understand that that is a big piece of why transit service doesn't extend through the county right now. But moving forward, to have a great transit system to really serve more residents, that's going to be critical. And then looking for opportunities to start developing some of those premium services, looking for opportunities to further expand commuter rail. So we're going to have TexRail coming in 2018. We need to start looking at opportunities to expand that to the southwest. We have identified opportunities for streetcar or rapid transit in these red lines, and then are really looking to build a frequent service network throughout the county. And that's what I'm going to hit on in just a second. So from that big vision, we've pared it down to focus on our 5-year recommendations. What does the T really need to get started on now to start making that vision a reality? And I'm going to divide these into 2 different categories. I'm going to talk first about our service recommendations. And so those include things like a frequent service network and more premium services. Then I'm going to talk about some of the non-service recommendations, the supports for transit, transit facilities, bus stops and shelters, access to transit, and then the ways that information is provided. So launching right in. Start with our service priorities. So the first recommendation in terms of improving service is to develop a frequent service network. Frequent service networks or frequent transit networks are something that we're starting to see in cities all across the US and really in cities around the world. What a frequent service network is a network of services that reach the most important destinations. So here we'd be looking for connections to Tarrant County's most important destinations. The services in a network like this operate very frequently from early morning until late at night. And when we talk about frequency, what does that actually mean? Well, most people consider service to be frequent if it operates every 10 to 15 minutes. That's considered to be very convenient service. Service that operates every 15 to 30 minutes, let's say, is considered to be somewhat convenient. So for the frequent service network, we want to move toward long hours of service, with service operating every 10 to 15 minutes in the peak hours, and then about every 15 to 30 minutes throughout the rest of the day. One thing I should mention before I move on. So when we're talking about, and I should have said this in relation to the transit vision as well, but when we're talking about these recommendations and these potential improvements, we are not talking about getting rid of the entire underlying transit system. We should assume that the underlying transit system remains, and what we're looking at here is enhancements, either adding new services or providing better service on the routes that do exist. And that's really where the frequent transit network comes into play. It is talking about beefing up services on existing routes and then adding new services, which ties us right in to the second recommendation, to improve existing services. So I mentioned the fact that the T does not operate for very many hours a day right now and that services are not very frequent. If you think about the challenges that somebody faces if they are not working the typical 8 to 5 schedule. So let's say you work a second shift somewhere and your job starts at 4. You might be able to take transit to get there, which is great. But if you don't get off until midnight, or maybe you don't get off until 1 a.m., there is no way for you to get home on transit. So being able to provide longer hours of service that meet the needs of different people traveling at different times of day for different purposes is a huge opportunity here. A lot of the peer cities that we would look at for Fort Worth operate between 20 and 21 hours of service a day. What we're recommending is that the T start moving toward 18 hours of service a day as our starting place. Of course, that has to be tailored to demand. It has to be tailored to what different communities want, but that is a great target to be moving toward. The other important piece of improving existing services is more weekend service. Right now, even though service is relatively limited during the weekdays, let's just be honest about that. But then when you start to look at the weekend, it's even more limited. Saturdays, not too much service, and Sundays, barely any at all. So providing opportunities for people to use transit across all days of the week is an important recommendation. Next is expanding service to new areas. And you saw this on the transit vision map. You saw this as we started talking about the frequent service network. This ties back to that market analysis that we looked at and the opportunities to grow service in areas that have significant demand. So you're seeing just a bubble format of what we looked at previously. These red areas are places that, if they don't now, will have significant transit demand. And so making sure that service reaches beyond the 820 loop and really starts to connect those areas is critical. That should be a combination of frequent services, so part of the frequent service network, and then also some what you might call regular local services, providing basic coverage, which maybe only operates once an hour, but it's something, it's some transit service. Thinking to what we've heard from people, and then thinking also about the frequent service network, part of making that network very effective is having service that feels like it's something special and that operates as something special. So there are two types of premium bus service that we do really encourage looking at as part of the frequent service network. The first is rapid bus, which you can think of like the Spur. So our rapid bus would build on what the Spur has already done with some transit priority to help move buses past stopped cars, and also improved stations. The Spur has nice stations. I think they're really great. They've got real-time information, they've got maps, they're well designed. So being able to provide a higher level of amenity with faster, more frequent service through this type of premium bus service is an important piece of the network. The second type of premium bus service is bus rapid transit, and you can think of this as Rapid Bus Plus. So it essentially builds on what Rapid Bus is doing in terms of transit priority measures and really high quality station amenities. Bus rapid transit very often operates in an exclusive transit lane, at least for a portion of its route. Certainly has high levels of transit priority and then really high quality amenities, often getting you something similar to what you would find at a rail station. Level boarding, off-board payment, of course real-time information, and typically some type of special branding that says, this is a special service. So it's a service that is very attractive and becomes compelling for people because of its speed, because of how recognizable it is as well. Another recommendation related to premium services is around commuter rail. People love commuter rail, which is fantastic. We've heard so many good things about TRE. The complaint that we've heard most often, or the request that we've heard most often, is that TRE needs more frequent midday service, late night service, and then Sunday service. People want to be able to use TRE for things other than just getting to and from work. And so and then look at what can be done on TexRail. So TexRail's opening in 2018, and beginning to look at adding that Southwest Spur that I mentioned is an important piece of enabling more people to use this type of premium service. Our second to last service recommendation focuses on Express Bus. So as Tarrant County has continued to grow, one of the things that we're starting to see happen is that employment centers are being located in places outside of downtown Fort Worth. Certainly downtown is going to continue to be a huge draw in terms of where people are coming to work, but we're also seeing a lot of jobs popping up in other areas. Obviously there are a lot of jobs over in Arlington, lots of jobs are popping up in Alliance and other places that really are going to require different thinking about express bus service and commuting service. So we want to make sure by building out the express bus network, we're building on the 6 express bus routes that the T already has, improving the service on those, so offering more trips, and then thinking about some of those reverse commute services that get people out of downtown as well. The last service-focused recommendation goes back to another type of premium service. And this is the opportunity to look again, and I know this has been a conversation in Fort Worth before, to look at streetcar and other types of circulators. The purpose of this type of premium service, absolutely there's a transportation function. There is also an economic development function with streetcar and with circulators. The intent of this kind of premium service is that you're really connecting key destinations. They're very downtown focused with spurs that take people out to the places that they commonly want to go. And you're really thinking about those trips that are just a little bit too long to walk, but the trips that it doesn't really make sense to hop in your car and figure out parking a couple of different times. So these kinds of approaches to providing premium service need to begin to be part of the conversation again. So moving to the non-service recommendations, I'm just going to jump through these pretty quickly. The first is better passenger facilities. So I mentioned that the Spur has really nice bus stops, good shelters, good passenger facilities. You can see that here in this photo with the real-time information. There also are some really nice bus stops downtown, some nice passenger facilities downtown. But being able to think creatively about providing a range of amenities at the T's different types of stops and stations is our recommendation here. I'm not at all saying that every single stop has to have a shelter and a bench and a map and 12 other things. But we do need to make sure that all of the stops that are part of the system have a focus on comfort, convenience, and safety. We know that waiting for a bus is a big part of the transit trip, and so that experience should be as comfortable and pleasant as possible. We've got 2 recommendations that are focused on connections. So if waiting for a bus is a big part of your transit trip, getting to the bus stop or to the train station is the other big piece. One of the things that can be done in the near term to improve connections is to start looking at outlying transit centers. Essentially what outlying transit centers do is give people the opportunity for a shorter, more direct trip that doesn't force them to go downtown. So if you think about the T's system today, it's what we would call a hub and spoke system, which means that everything's coming downtown and then radiating back out. That type of system certainly has some benefits, one of them being that it's really easy to time connections because everybody's leaving from the same point at the same time. But what it does is mean that if, for example, you are right up here and you'd like to make a trip here, you don't have a way that you can do that directly. You can't even shorten it in any particular way right now. You need to come all the way downtown and then go all the way back out. So what outlying transit centers do is make it possible to think differently about connections. They're an important part of thinking regionally about transit as well, being able to make connections here at the edge of the county to a service that continues on to Dallas County, for example. Another piece of connections involves park and ride lots. So the T has some really high quality park and ride lots. The North Park and Ride is a great example. It is built specifically for transit. However, there are a lot of park and ride lots that are shared. So maybe they're in a Walmart parking lot or maybe in a church parking lot. And on the one hand, it's great to be able to take advantage of those kinds of partnerships, but it is also really important that park and ride lots provide a direct trip for people. You don't want folks to have to drive from their house in the opposite direction of where they're trying to go to park at a park and ride lot and then basically have to double back. And the bus doesn't want to have to do that either. The bus shouldn't have to go out of its way to get to a park and ride lot. So being really deliberate about building park and ride lots that are specifically for transit and then also locating them in ways that make trips more direct is an important recommendation for these first 5 years. Along with that, the T can look at enhancing amenities at park and ride lots. We've heard ideas for covered parking. This one happens to have solar panels on it, but something that gives people a little bit more confidence about leaving their vehicle for a day and using transit for a trip. Another piece of connections is access to transit, and this is an area where the T is entirely reliant on partnerships. The T certainly has a role in access to transit, but for the most part, it's the municipalities, the cities and county where the T operates who have the biggest role. So if you think about Fort Worth and Tarrant County, you know there are a lot of areas that don't have sidewalks. There are a lot of really wide roads that don't have crosswalks, don't have a safe place to cross. That makes accessing transit a real challenge. And it's not that the T is able to come in and build sidewalks everywhere. Certainly the city of Fort Worth can't afford to do that either. But being really deliberate about focusing improvements on access to transit is going to help with people's mobility. Another key piece of this is building complete streets that support transit. And the partnership opportunity here is, again, with cities. We, for example, have been working closely with the city of Fort Worth. They are updating their master thoroughfare plan, which essentially sets design standards, sets street types for the arterials in Fort Worth. Part of that coordination has been around making sure there's space for transit, making sure that on some of these key corridors, we have the opportunity for dedicated transit lanes if we need them in the future. And then the last piece of this access recommendation that I want to talk about is another type of partnership. And that is partnerships that's focused on employers and then other types of private entities like Uber and Lyft. So let's think about that new express bus route that we might talk about to Alliance. So great, you've got commuter express service, you can get out to your job at Alliance, but the place that you work is still, maybe it's 3 miles from the transit center. How are you going to make that last connection? The T is not going to be able to offer that kind of service necessarily. So maybe your employer can provide a shuttle. Maybe the T works out a partnership with your employer to help you make that connection. Another option that some transit agencies are starting to use is partnerships with companies like Uber and Lyft. So the transit agency and, let's say, Lyft engage in a partnership, and the person who has ridden transit is able to get a reduced fare to make that connection for the last few miles of their trip. So the focus of all of these types of improvements is, of course, increasing access and mobility. Our last 2 5-year recommendations, the first of those last 2, is focused on information, so providing better information. This is an area where the T has already started work. One of the most frustrating parts about a transit trip can be not knowing what's going on, not knowing if you just missed the bus or if it's still 2 minutes away. So being able to provide real-time information that takes the guesswork out of using transit is critical. This is something that the T is already working on, and I learned this morning that they expect to have real-time information available within the year. So that's fantastic news. And of course, you can share real-time information in a lot of different ways. It can be on a smartphone, via an app, it can be at a bus stop or station, and that is an important piece of making transit easier to understand and use. The other 2 things that the T has underway, or 2 of the other things I should say, is thinking about other types of improvements to information. A new and improved website, and then also producing better printed information. A new system map that's easier for people to understand. That's all work that's underway and will be complete by May of 2016. So that's really exciting to see that some of these recommendations are already moving forward. Finally, I want to talk for just a second about branding. So I mentioned that people don't necessarily see the T as offering service for them. And there is an opportunity, especially as the T improves these services, to develop a new brand that conveys that things have changed. There is new service available, there's better service available, and it's something that you can use. At least you can try it and see how well it works for you. So you could look at rebranding the entire system. You can also look at using special branding for a high quality service. So the Spur, for example, uses a bit of special branding. The name even is kind of a special brand. Looking at building on that as part of the frequent service network, particularly for Bus Rapid Transit and Rapid Bus, is an important piece of this. There's also the chance to think about, even with some special branding, to think about a unified brand. So what does that mean? Well, these are all services that the T has a hand in operating. And they've all got very distinct brands. And sometimes what that means for people is that they don't understand that there's actually a lot more service out there than they think there is. That the sum is really a lot greater than just these individual services. So developing a unified brand can help to convey to people that there is an entire network available. The first thing that the T is going to need to do is work with all communities throughout the county to determine their level of interest and really start to build support. Yes, there are only 3 full member communities right now, but there's certainly the opportunity for other communities to participate. Part of that, though, is giving people different ways that they can participate. Maybe they don't have to buy in at a half-cent sales tax. Maybe we go to a community and say, all right, here's the vision. These are your options for how it gets implemented. Would you like to contribute for additional service? Would you like to contribute for a route? So talking about different ways that people can participate. And part of what that does is help communities get the service that's right for them. This absolutely sets a vision for the whole county, but does still have to be tailored to what's right in an individual community. So then to sum it all up, if you think back to those maps of Tarrant County and Dallas County in 1976 and 2014, it's pretty easy to see that the system has kind of been standing still for a while. There's a lot of lost ground to be made up for, and certainly the county is only going to continue to grow. What we've shown you tonight is just a quick look at some of the types of improvements that are possible. There are a lot of different ways to improve and expand service, but the important thing is to start moving now to develop great transit service for Fort Worth and Tarrant County. And of course, we are excited to hear your feedback and thoughts. We've got, Kirby is going to join me up here and we'll be happy to answer your questions. We'd love comments on the boards, draw lines on the maps, and then you can continue to engage with us in all of these other media as well.